Serious, people who are advocating for the abolishment of the police force, who are you expecting to keep vulnerable people safe from criminals? The general idea is to replace just using police for every crime with specific people for specific issues. For example, specific public servants dedicated to stuff like road safety, stopping suicide attempts, and stopping violent crimes. Reading the comments really concern me as a social worker. I don't think people realize how stretched thin social workers already are. We have crazy caseloads and can barely give our clients the time of day as it is. If we were also expected to respond to crisis situations, every client would suffer and so would the social workers. Many of the more experienced social workers I have met are jaded as it is. Even when you aren't jaded, de-escalation is hard and not foolproof. Also, de-escalating someone in office or a neutral setting is far different than de-escalating someone in their home. Vast majority of people with mental illness are not violent, but sending social workers into crisis situations with people they have no relationship with is a recipe for disaster. As a young woman, I would absolutely not do it, and social workers are majority women. Are any of the people advocating for a move to unarmed social workers actually willing to do this work themselves? Because I don't think most of my colleagues would be volunteering for this, especially with how little social workers get paid. I mean, frick, I'm an EMT and I have co-worker who've had knives pulled on them. In that brief split-second situation, you cannot talk them down. You can either run and hope you get the frick out of Dodge in time, or you can fight. That's why we need police. I cannot be expected so safely enter an unknown domicile with possibly armed homicidal people inside without a trained and armed person behind me. From the ones I have read that had plans, because I'm in agreement with them, it was to divvy up the resources into entirely separate departments, instead of forcing poorly trained and heavily armed cops to deal with all our society's failures. Someone having a mental emotional crisis, maybe homeless, instead of a cop. It's a health professional or a social worker. A traffic accident, traffic cop, who does not have a firearm. Civil dispute, again, the responder doesn't need a gun. Armed bank robbery, now you get an armed responder. Additionally, most of the resources go into prevention, addiction centers, better shelters, better healthcare, better housing assistance, better jobs. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. This is the most accurate representation of people who actually do want to dismantle the police, beyond demilitarization. Some people want those responsibilities to be completely independent and separate institutions. Others will accept specifically trained units within the police department. Yep, nobody. Defunding is not equal to abolishing. When Republicans defunded music and arts programs in public schools in favor of core curriculums, those programs didn't disappear, and kids still studied music and art and dance. They just had to do it with fewer resources. Those programs were simply de-emphasized in schools where the locals couldn't come up with the priorities to secure resources to fund them. What's wrong with the same approach to policing? In areas where local citizens feel a larger police presence is warranted, let them fund that. Sure, the feds can help. What's stupid though is a default that says every community police system has to be based on a strict military model and must be armed like and structured like a standing army. It makes armed combat training the default. What the defund movement is arguing, at least in part, is that traditional system has become bloated and unwieldy over time. And perhaps by diverting resources away from over-militarization and into community programs designed to lessen the stresses that push people into incarceration for non-violent issues like drug offenses and insignificant property crimes, you can lower the need for the weaponization of policing via the current one-size-for-all approach has been failing too many Americans for way too long. Armored vehicles in the streets aren't needed except in very rare instances, yet that's exactly what every state maintains, fed by a federal surplus military procurement model that barely fits the world we live in. When was the last time you heard about a situation where a true military level response to actual violent action was required on US interior soil? I remember first seeing the phrase when the tool you have is a hammer. Every problem starts to look like a nail. It might be the same thing with the militarization of the police. Defunding means make sure those organizations are equipped to meet the actual missions they need to perform. including SWAT and maybe even very limited armor in reserve for the oddball occurrence. But to stockpile tons of that stuff like we do now in every major, minor and sub-minor population center is a pretty poor way to manage resources when the biggest social stresses are actually mental illness, poverty and industrial robots taking people's jobs away. My 2 cents anyway. I don't think there's a significant amount of support behind this for you to worry. Besides, most of us understand that the issue is about how police brutality comes from more of an abuse of power than people not obeying the laws. And oftentimes, there are people who disobey the laws, but have the power or money to not be as negatively impacted by the consequences as people who don't have much good fortune in their lives, often from not being born into it. Police brutality doesn't make all police bad, but it's important for those who support cops to remember that the system is flawed and there are too many cops prejudiced against certain people for it to be ignored, serving as a testament to how flawed the system of justice is in various countries, including America as we can see right now. Even people who obey the laws still suffer because of the color of their skin or other factors they simply cannot control. And we often see people disobey minor laws yet receive major punishment, such as death, disproportionate to their crimes. The question isn't about making people obey the law, it's about how to fix a system that has been historically biased for too long. So, don't worry, you're not about to be left without a police force, but if anything, a better police force that protects not only you, but everyone else, on equal grounds from actual criminals who want to harm people. Something important to note, no one is saying only Black Lives Matter, we're saying that Black Lives Matter too. They matter as much as anyone else's and deserve a justice system that protects them as much as everyone else. So my understanding, as infantile as it may be, is that the goal is more than just make the cops go away. It's combined with plans to use the money we were spending on police for community support and outreach, as well as education, housing, and helping get kids good paying jobs as they transition into adulthood. The idea is to identify the cultural influences that go into creating crime, poverty, lack of opportunity, generational behavior, fear of financial failure, etc., and to fix those so that the cops are much less necessary. These plans would also eliminate entire classes of crime, meaning that things like homelessness and theft would be greatly diminished, if not ended entirely. But of course there will always be people that seek to hurt others, so there will have to be some enforcement arm that seeks to help keep that from happening. But in most cases, it would be community based and would focus on rehabilitation rather than strictly on punishment. But no one wants the world to remain exactly as it is today, just minus people being held accountable for their actions. That would be awful. No one is suggesting abolish the police force and replace it with nothing. Every single person calling to defund the police is also calling for using that funding in ways that better improve the safety of the community. Why would you call the cops when someone is having a mental health crisis? The police are woefully inadequately trained for that kind of event. Take some of the funding from the cops and put into more social workers, more addiction treatment, crap, job investment. Honestly, pay cops what they're worth. They get paid like nurses, but with a fraction of the education. A more educated police force is a more peaceful police force because they have more tools at their disposal and just the weapons on their belt. Promote a better cop instead of putting the ex-high school bully in a uniform to continue bullying people. Invest in better training for police and you'll require fewer of them. As for my serious reply, the majority of calls aren't for the complete disbandment of police departments. That will never happen and the people calling for it know that. Citizens want police reform, more training in how to respond to situations non-violently and less militarization. Minneapolis City Police has just been voted on to be disbanded by the city. Breaking on CNN right now. It's getting pretty real. One thing I've heard people say is they don't want the police to be abolished, just for their funding to be cut back. We need a police force but we don't need APCs and tanks rolling down our streets. We don't need SWAT, team raid for drug offenses. We don't need cops with rifles if you aren't taking on someone considered armed and dangerous. Less funding would mean less money to spend on excessive vehicles and equipment. A defunded police would make citizens less scared of their law enforcement and more open to cooperation with the officers. Another interpretation is that it's a negotiation tactic, essentially giving police departments an ultimatum. Give us what we want or we'll proceed to defund you. I am not for the abolishment of the police. I am for serious, in-depth, all-encompassing reform, retraining and redistribution of police to better serve the communities in which they are assigned. They need to be licensed, like doctors or lawyers, so that if they are under review, on unpaid leave or whatever for an investigation, their license is suspended, so they cannot quit and go be rehired elsewhere to avoid trouble. Body cams must be on at all times. If discovered off during an offense, license revoked and proper punishments ensue. Much needs to be done to make the police responsible for their actions. What folks need to remember when talking about this issue, and it's super important. The police criminal justice system is not set up to protect the public from the criminal. It's set up to protect the criminals from the public. Without the police CJ system in place, soon the public would be taking justice into their own hands. There would be no Miranda rights. There would be no guarantee of a lawyer. There would be no jail and 3 squares a day. There would be no trial with a jury of your peers. There would be no police brutality to complain about and no government body to hear the complaint anyway. Justice would be delivered swiftly and the sentence would often be fatal to the criminal. Swiftly, arbitrarily, and incorrectly. I made this post asking related questions in another sub. I will copy paste it. Would disbanding a police department just result in any one landowner company with enough money just hiring private security contractors? Would this essentially leave poorer neighborhoods as the only ones without protection? Would private security be held to the same civic standards as police? Or would we essentially be seeing mercenary militias who don't answer to the taxpayer? Would everyone in the city get a tax credit for all the money they've already paid to fund the police? Is disbanding the same as just firing everyone? Would every officer lose all their benefits, pensions, etc.? Would they all then immediately sue the city, perhaps even in a class action lawsuit? Practically speaking, what the frick does it actually mean to disband the police department? These are the real questions no one wants to answer. The police. The whole abolish the police movement is actually about removing the extra hats that we force police officers to wear, like social worker, psychologist, etc. You can't increase training and get better police by decreasing funding. If you raise the pay, the requirements, and the training required, it would get rid of a lot of the bad apples in the system. Also, please get rid of stupid police unions and have a police oversight committee at the Fed level that looks at all uses of force and brings charges. Hope I'm not too late here, but I have a different take. Lots of comments here about divvying up responsibilities between separate teams. But how about before or even on top of that we make a specific 4-year policing university degree the prerequisite to becoming a cop, or even a 2-year diploma licensing program? That would surely weed out a massive chunk of meatheads that join just to exert their sociopathy, and most importantly it would better equip officers with the valuable training to deal with tense situations. I'm sure the already greedy and corrupt higher education system would be more than happy to oblige. One solution I saw was that it would be a neighborhood watch. That, in my opinion, is the dumbest freaking idea I have ever heard. The whole snitches get stitches mentality makes that solution impossible to succeed. Imagine if the whore enforced the laws. Jesus. At their best, police don't prevent crime, they just help punish it. Those millions spent on giving police military equipment could be spent on infrastructure and community programs that actually lower crime rates. Most of the comments I see here are saying that people just want reform, but that's not really true. There is a big push for the police force to be abolished completely. Minneapolis City Council just voted to disband their police force. This is happening. Reforming means putting more money into the police force, which is the exact opposite of what we want to do. I'm not an expert on this by any means. I'm just trying to clarify a little. The way the police force is set up, they have to make a certain number of arrests in order to maintain funding regardless of actual crime. There's also a deep-rooted connection between US police forces and white supremacy groups. Putting more money into a system like that won't fix it. It will make it grow. For the most part, community-based initiatives would replace the police force. So much money goes into the police that could be put towards resources for domestic violence, sexual assault victims so that they can get away from their abusers, mental health initiatives. People with disabilities and or mental illnesses are several times more likely to be killed by cops, etc. Abolishing the police force can't be done immediately. It starts with defunding and relegating duties to different initiatives, organizations, etc. Like I said, I'm not an expert on the topic, but hopefully that addresses some of the question. Yeah, rich people in fancy houses are going to pool their money together and hire a private security for their neighborhoods. What the heck do they think poor neighborhoods are going to do? Insane. It's not that the force will be removed, it's that the police union contract will be terminated. The force will be reconstituted, but this time with outside oversight. Police departments only answer to themselves, and nobody else has the ability to remove officers with complaints against them. Honestly, no matter what or who you chose to protect you, there will always be a 1% that messes up the rest. Then that system is flawed. I think we should be talking more about shrinking the police's responsibilities. Thieves become our response to the problems of the world. Homelessness, mental illness, poverty, drugs, and they have no real training, tools, or ability to change these things, reduce their budgets and provide targeted services that can help. I don't think many people are proposing we eliminate police departments. Defunding the police typically means cutting out the portions of their budgets that they use to buy tanks, armored personnel carriers, assault weapons, and other garbage that police absolutely do not need, like the mine-resistant vehicles that the suburb down the road from me has. Why does a suburban police department that protects a few square miles filled with college students and middle-class families need half a dozen MRAPs? So you don't just cut their funding to zero. Legislatures earmark funding for specific purposes. You stop the military, police transfer programs, and you cut the funding that's being used to buy weapons that were intended for battlefields. Then you redirect a portion or maybe even all of that funding to improved police training, public health, and social work, all of which have been shown to reduce crime more than increasing the number of police or the number and size of guns they carry. Heck, you even increase police salaries. Well-educated, open-minded, ambitious people don't become cops because the pay is crap and it's considered to be a job for knuckle-draggers. If you pay better, you get better people. There are a few examples of people suggesting that specific police forces be completely eliminated, such as in the city of Minneapolis. In that case, county and state police forces would take charge while a new city police department is built. This has been done before. In Camden, NJ, in Compton, CA. Even in that extreme case, there are multiple levels of redundancy and temporary closing down one of them isn't the same thing as abolishing all police. No one is suggesting that we do that, except anarchists. Ignore them. As someone who has serious problems with the police, I wonder the same thing. What should be abolished are the police unions. I have no problem with unions defending members when accused, but when they fight firing of actual bad cops, they go over the line. But broadly, the police already fail to protect the truly vulnerable. Heck, the vulnerable are often criminals. The law, in its majestic equality, forbids both the rich and the poor from stealing bread and sleeping under bridges. The problems with the police are deeply ingrained. There's a culture of silence that protects bad cops and punishes the good cops who report them. A culture that makes 57 people quit the riot squad when 2 of their co-workers are arrested for assaulting someone and leaving them to bleed out on the sidewalk. The rot is too deeply ingrained, and at this point there's probably no amount of individual firings that can fix things. The system needs to be torn down and rebuilt, and while we're there, we can build something less militarized, and stop sending people into wellness check situations with guns drawn. That always makes me laugh. I know that it's a serious concern, because who would you ring if you had an intruder in your home or being subjected to a mugging, rape, etc.? Who would you turn to? An experienced police force or a bunch of protesters waving their plywood placards singing, "Down with this sort of thing"? Let's take a small matter, a small traffic accident. One person runs a red light and T-bones another car. The driver at fault swears he had the right of way, and he's peeved because his car is damaged, and he can't afford it. You send out an unarmed civil servant to make a report. Now, does this servant write a ticket to the already pee-off driver, or give a summons to a traffic court hearing? Do both drivers leave with no charges, or is one charged? How will the pee-off driver react to a summons or a ticket? If he's a large man and a small servant, will he accept the charges, or attack the civil servant because he feels wronged? Because this is a very possible scenario. How does someone keep the situation de-escalated? I've been poor and around crime, and some people are just crap people and you need the cops. In my country there are plenty of social workers and programs and welfare and rungs on the ladder. These people don't give a crap. They don't want help. They don't want to work. They don't want to be law-abiding. As a poor person I can't afford to be robbed. I need some semblance of order. It's often poor people who suffer the most from a lack of law and order because dickheads tend to screw up their own neighborhoods first. I think we should watch how it all pans out in Minneapolis. I personally think it's a terrible idea. I live in LA and I can't imagine the chaos that would come from not having a police presence. We will still have gang wars, drug trafficking, fraud, robberies, physical altercation, rape, murder act. I think we're more sensible here. I heard the argument that funding would go to education and job placement, but stuff like that doesn't stop someone from being bad. I live in Broward County under the jurisdiction of the Broward Sheriff's Office. They are pretty much useless and exist only to raise money by handing out tickets. When my house was burglarized they showed up 6 hours later, explaining that all available officers were doing traffic duty. When they finally arrived, they sent one cop dressed in full battle rattle that didn't know what the heck he was doing, and he clearly didn't want to be there. His partner was a teenager police explorer. Had they canvassed the neighborhood after I called they would have found the 3 burglars who had done $30,000 worth of damage to my house. When I tracked them down the following day to where they were using one of my electronic consoles using the IP address, they told me that the detectives don't work on the weekends and couldn't send anybody to that address. Eventually I tracked them down to the pawn shop where they tried to pawn my stuff. The only reason they were caught is that I did all the legwork for them. What's the difference between that and having no police force? Very little. By the way, this is the same department that did not confront the shooter at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High while he was committing mass murder, instead opting to wait for the shooting to stop. It seems to me they prefer their victims unarmed. Cops need to go back to being peace officers. They need to go back to serving and protecting. They need to stop treating the people they serve as the enemy. Otherwise we really don't need them. We are desperately in need of an overhaul. When it comes to abolishing certain governmental things, I feel the advocates are very unorganized and scattered. Some want to get rid of police completely, some want restraint on them, and others want public servants to handle things. Like they think they're all fighting for the same thing, but they all have different ideas of what that thing is. People don't want to abolish the police entirely. We still need the police to deal with people that commit crimes. The idea is to defund the police and change our entire system of what policing means, and is because we criminalize and police a lot of stuff we should not be criminalizing. Essentially, we want to replace the system we have now with an entirely new system. Defund does not mean give the police a $0 budget. It means instead of giving them upwards of 60% of a city's budget, just give them 15-20%. These numbers are just made up for the example, and use the other 45-40% to reinvest in the community in various ways. We should invest in affordable housing instead of criminalizing homelessness. We should invest in rehabilitating and helping people escape their addictions to drugs instead of criminalizing them. We should invest heavily into education instead of funneling kids into the school to prison pipeline. We should invest in addressing the ever-increasing wealth gap instead of forcing people that don't make a living wage into desperate measures. These are just a few issues that the police cannot and should not be trying to solve. We're wasting a lot of money and other resources policing these issues. It's not about creating some dream world where nobody commits crimes. We're still going to need police officers because there's still going to be people who break the law, kill and other things. Imagine a society where we fix our social ills instead of criminalizing them and policing them. there would be less crime, a healthy trust between citizens and law enforcement, tons of money saved to invest in the community. Well, the police aren't guards. They mostly have to wait until something awful has already happened and go clean it up. Better prevention services would keep many awful things from happening in the first place, so there would be less need for cops. That's one thought, but I think abolishing the police is a horrible idea. What we need to do is train, support and expect more of the police, rotate them to different jobs so they don't burn out, keep them better connected to the communities they work in. Do they never see themselves as entering a jungle full of dangerous exotic animals when they go to work, but see the local people as actual people? Any misfit or abusive behavior should get you sent to a shrink or retraining or fired immediately. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.